So to wrap it up, kind of when we're wrapping everything up and looking at it, is where are your legal concerns, where are things that could go wrong with having your handbook or having things in your handbook that maybe shouldn't be in there. Just as a disclaimer, anything that's illegal you shouldn't include. It's really common to think that you can have a policy that tells employees not to talk about their wages. That's in violation of the National Labor Relations Board or National Labor Relations Act. Employees can talk about wages and benefits, so don't have a policy in the handbook that says you can't, because that's bad. But other things that are problematic is using a certain kind of language to maybe say guarantee a job, because that then makes your handbook look more like an employee contract. So as much as you want to evoke feeling like a family, be really careful to say things like welcome to the family, or you're going to have a job here as long as you can do such and such. So because maybe they won't have a job there. You don't necessarily know, heaven forbid, that something bad happens, but you never know what the future is going to hold. So be really careful about that kind of language, because that can create legal obligations. Be careful about what policies you do include and have things lined out. For example, we mentioned FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act. Make sure to include that only if you're covered. If you're not a covered employer, or if you have a change in your status from a covered employer to a non-covered employer, or vice versa, and your handbook needs to be updated. There have been court cases where an employee said, well, it was in the handbook, so I should have access to this. But that employer wasn't necessarily covered, but they did include it in the handbook, or maybe they had lost coverage, the eligibility status, but didn't remove it from the handbook. So be careful in having those things in there and using really clear language. Another thing is when you have those policies and procedures and they're not being followed accurately. So having your managers know, being consistent. If you're going to write Janie up for being tardy 3 times, you need to write Joseph up for being tardy 3 times. If you're going to look at Stanley's attendance issues or Stanley being violent in the workplace, you need to do the same thing for Stephanie or whoever it is. You don't want to pick and choose when you apply your policies, when you apply your disciplinary actions. You want to be really consistent. So, if you're having a big change to how you're doing things internally, or if there is an update to a state or federal or local regulation like the sick time, you want to make sure you're updating your handbook so that you're actually following those regulations. You're actually following the policies that you have in the handbook. So it's really important to, maybe about every year or so, go back and look at your things. Or if you get an update that such and such state has added something and you need to do an update for your handbook, that you get those updated.